everybody, sorry about that. It cut out before I had a chance to say that the lives finish on 1 hour, so you have to go back and restart it so that people can see. Sorry about that. Anyway, I'm here again. Now, when I gather so I'm not gathering my sleeve, and when I gather, I would normally go from both ends until I reach the top. So it's just a little bit easier to do it that way than it is to try and pull your stitches all from the one end. So just going to do that now. And I also find it a little bit easier to just gather this first now before I actually sew the sleeve together. It just makes life a bit easier when you're handling your fabric. So now that I've done my gathers, I'm just going to join my sleeve piece together, like so. I think actually I also need to gather at the bottom of the sleeves. Yeah, I'm going to do that later. Right, so I'm going to sew my side seams of the sleeves together. You've probably noticed that I am following the instructions, but not particularly closely, because there's 100 different ways of doing anything, and just because instructions on any pattern tell you to do it one way doesn't mean that you have to do it that way. So it's whatever works for you, although obviously there are some times when it's easier to do one thing first before another. Okay, so my sleeve is together, and I'm just going to go and press it and then finish the edges. I've said this previously that it's quite useful to have a sleeve ham when you press things. So I have 2 hams, one fat one for doing shoulders and that, and one sleeve one. And the reason for this is that it just helps you to iron, or press rather, not iron, your curves a little more easily. Okay. So because the body is not 3D, sorry, the body is 3D, your pattern, your fabric is not, so you have to mold things into a 3D shape. Okay, so I'm just going to go finish these edges. Like I said before, the Fibre Mood way is that you would finish both sides first and then sew them together. Clearly I forgot to do that, so I've just sewed them together and then pressed it open and finished the edges here. So now we're going to set our sleeve into the bodice and put it together. Now this is where my stand comes in handy, my mannequin, because I can check that I'm pinning on the right side. So she's already looking quite nice. And then I have to find the notches on my sleeve, my back 2 notches. That's the front and that's the back. Okay, so if I know that this is the back notch, then I know that this sleeve has to go on this side here. So then what I do, that's okay, is I look for the top notch, which I've marked with masking tape from before, and I would take that notch and pin it like so, or use clips or something, it's also fine. So I'm going to go back and fix this later. And then I know that the bottom of my sleeve needs to match the underarm seam. So that goes here, like so. But at least I know that I'm guaranteed to have the correct side, the right sleeve pinned to the right side. I remember I saw a picture once, somebody was doing a tailored jacket in a couture class, and in the sleeve in the couture class, it tends to be a bit shaped rather than completely flat. And because she didn't do that and she didn't check what direction that it was the correct sleeve, the sleeve was actually perfectly set in but swinging that way. So that was why after that I decided that I was always going to triple check where my sleeves were going. Yep, so here's my front, here's my back, here's my sleeve hanging off it, and I'm just going to pin the underarm seam together. And oh, I can see that Valentine has just joined. Hello, Valentine. Valentine does the French sew-alongs. Her Instagram name is Happy as a Bee. If you don't know it already, then you should go and check her out because she has the most beautiful photos and she makes beautiful things. And Abby says, I did a full line jacket with both sleeves perfectly set but switched and only knows when it's finished. Yeah, right. So I've had that as well. So yeah, that's why I always double check where my sleeves are going. And it's handy to, in that way, to have a dress form or just put it on yourself or something. Also fine. Whatever works. Okay, so I'm just looking for my notches, and again, I'm just using my little masking tape trick so I can actually see where I've put them. And put them here. Because yeah, once you've gathered, it can be quite difficult to figure out where things are. Okay, so it's important that the double notches match together because your sleeves aren't symmetrical. Put it here. Oh, thank you, Valentine. She says that she loves to watch and listen to sewing class in English. I wish that I could understand what you're saying when I watch your sewing class in French. Unfortunately, it doesn't always work out, but I love to look at other people's sewing spaces and see how they do things because, you know, you always learn something, don't you? Okay, so I can see here that I've over-gathered my my blouse, so my sleeve rather, so I'm just going to open it up a bit, but I think it's easier to over-gather things and then kind of adjust rather than be pulling too hard on your gathering threads and resulting in uneven gathers when you sew. Okay. And again, there don't need to be too many gathers in. So in the front part here, there's not too many gathers I can see. Okay, but the gathers tend to be on the top in this blouse, I think, by the looks of it. Yeah. And again, yeah, check where your notches are because that will determine the fullness of the sleeve. He says, Miriam, well, I'm happy that you understand my my English class, Miriam. But you can also watch Valentine in French if you like. I think it's really nice that Fibre Mood publishes things in 5 different languages, because everybody has a different. Every country has their way of dressing, and people make things in different, same pattern, different fabrics, different styles, and it's always really fun to see who's making what, or I think it is anyway. Okay, right, I'm nearly there with my sleeves. Okay, so it also looks like at the back in this section there's also not a lot of gathering going on, or maybe you don't need to gather it at all, but it doesn't really matter. Again, it's just helping me to set in the sleeve properly. Okay, now if this was not meant to have a puff sleeve, then I would go through with some thread and just baste, so just hand stitch a big running stitch all around to make sure that I avoid any puckers. So I did that on this Charlotte dress, and you can see, so you don't end up with little wrinkles here. So it's just useful to do that extra step of hand basting. However, having said that, I know that some people are absolutely dead set against hand sewing. If you have a machine, then why would I want to hand sew? But I like to try and get things right the first time as much as humanly possible, and that's just one of the things that helps me, because I really hate unpicking. Okay, so over to my machine. And when I put in sleeves, I usually pin it in go from the sleeve side, because then I can actually see the gathers when I sew, rather than trying to sew from the bodice side. But again, that's just personal preference and what works for me. So I tend to start at the bottom of the arm, so the armhole seam, so that any ugly thread finishings can be hidden away there rather than at the top, for example. Valentine, if you're still there, did you manage to finish your blouse yesterday? I didn't manage to watch the whole video, so I'm not sure whether you did. Now again, because this is a gathered, you're meant to see the gathers on the top of the shoulder, so it doesn't matter that if your gathering isn't exactly precise. But obviously it's good to try and distribute them reasonably evenly, and having 2 lines of gathering definitely will help. What have I done here? Oh, I've got a pin stuck. Oh, damn it. That'll teach me to pin from the wrong side. I'm going pretty slowly when I'm setting in the sleeve here again, just because sometimes you will need to adjust things as you go. So there's no point trying to go too fast. Sandra says she needs to go back to work now, so I'm waiting for my package to arrive. Yeah, see you later, Sandra. Thanks for joining. And yeah, I hope you receive your packages really soon. Okay, so here's my sleeve. Oh, better take the pins out. That'd be helpful, wouldn't it? So here's a top tip for you that I did not do, is pin from just one side when I was holding the sleeve together. Where has this gone? Oh, here. Sorry, having a bit of a daft day. Okay, and there you have it. Yep. Now, I've run into one problem because I have just realized that I still have pinned my sleeve inside out. The finishing's there. So, but what I'm going to do is, instead of unpicking the sleeve this way, I'm just going to unpick the threads this way, so I only have to reattach the bottom part. So that was a bit of a failure on my part. Luckily, for this purpose, the fabric is the same both sides, so in that sense it doesn't really matter what the right sides are the same as the wrong side, so it doesn't matter. I just have to spend a couple of minutes unpicking this because I've been daft, and it's faster for me to unpick this now and show you what the next step is, rather than try and gather and set another sleeve in place. So I'm just going to, so just bear with me a moment. I'm really sorry about that. Obviously, sometimes when I multitask, things go a little bit wrong. And hello Gerda, how you doing? Gerda from 38 Cake has just joined. She is one of my friends in Belgium. So thank you for joining, Gerda. How is your work going today? You might notice I'm not using an unpicker, by the way, because I don't know where mine is, to be honest. And also, I find if the tips of your scissors are sharp enough, then you really don't need to use it. Can't believe I just set the sleeve in inside out. Such a failure. You like my dress from last week? Thank you very much. This is the thank you very much, Lynn. This is the Charlotte from last week, the short version. Has anyone else made the Charlotte who's watching this right now? I think I'm going to make another version of this. I don't wear ruffles very often, actually. I haven't worn ruffles since I was like 18. But I am quite determined to be able to wear them nicely. And I think this would also look good in a print. So I'm going to try with short sleeves, and I find the waist just a little bit low. So I'm going to shift it up a bit, and then I'm not sure about whether I'm going to do anything about this V or not. The shape seems okay for now, but maybe I would change it a little bit. The problem is with things like necklines is that if you cut it too low, then there's no going back, is there? You can't change it. So, right, now I'm trying to pull my inside out sleeve apart. Okay, so my way to unpick is to go along the seam, not on the inside, and then every few stitches just snip and do it that way. Right, so that's done. Okay, so now I'm just going to go and reattach the side seams together, the underarm seam together. It's going to be easier if I do it inside out. So it's a good thing I haven't actually overlocked the arm seam yet, because that would have been a bit of a disaster. Bernice, I am 5'4", so about 164 centimeters tall. I assume you're thinking about your Charlotte dress? Okay, let's check it and check that I'm the right, I've done it right this time. Please, please, please tell me I've done it right this time. Yeah, that's looking much better. Okay, cool. So yeah, that's the sleeve the correct way around. And now I just have to close up the bottoms of the underarm seam again, and then I can carry on. Bernice has asked how tall I am, and for lengthening and shortening purposes, I think it is helpful to know what other people's height is, and there is also a height chart on the on all the Fibre Mood patterns, so you can check what height that they're drafted for. But just bear in mind that our torso versus leg length, I guess, ratio might be different. So just, yeah, bear that in mind when you're shortening things. I find the Charlotte to be the short version of the Charlotte already to be quite short. And I think for me, I would actually lengthen it a little bit next time I make it. Okay, right. Okay, that's my corrected sleeve. Sorry about that. And then, so I'm not going to press this just now because, yeah, we just need to see what the, see how it looks. I think it looks quite nice when it's puffy instead of just being like squished down flat. So now we're going to do the gathers on the bottom of the sleeve. And again, 2 lines of gathers here. Excuse me for a moment while I blow my nose because of my hay fever, not COVID. Hey, I've just spotted in my garden that one of the roses is actually out. So, a rose appearing in April. That is, yeah, almost unheard of. Okay. So, I'm going to start my gathering stitches. So this is my seam on my arm. I'm going to start my gathering stitches here and finish them here, because if you try and pull gathers over the seam, it can be quite tricky. And not really necessary. And again, like I said before, in case you didn't see it, I hold my work here. So the fabric will automatically gather a little bit without me even having to pull on the threads. Very useful for setting in a sleeve, but for gathering in general as well. and leave your thread tails long so that you can pull on them later. So that's my first line. I'm just going to do my second line. Okay, so that's my gathering done on the sleeve. Zizi and Caroline, you're really tall people, 6 foot and 5'10". Awesome. I wish I was tall. When I was a teenager, I always had this hang up about not being tall enough. I grew to, I think 164 centimeters or 5'4" is a reasonably average height. But I remember definitely feeling as a teenager that I really wanted to be a lot taller than I was, and feeling sad that I wasn't. I think it probably also has something to do with the fact that I grew up in a town, in a village in a western country of about 1,000 people. So there wasn't a lot of diversity there, let's put it that way. Okay, so my gathers are done. I'm just going to pull on the sleeves. And I'm going to pull from both sides, just to make life easier for myself. And then I'm going to show you how we're going to put the cuff in. Pull. Yeah, I think gathering is not really the most fun of all the jobs. But next week we are going to be doing the mirror dress, and that one is also full of gathering. It has really pretty tiers on it. So yeah, if you don't know the mirror dress, go and check it out, because that's what we'll be doing next week. It'll be a nice floaty, cool summer dress. Zizi says that when she wanted to dance, she couldn't get a partner because all the boys were not tall enough. Yeah, right? Everybody has a different set of problems. So, I was just picking up my my cuff piece. Now there's a few ways you can do this. You can do this like you would attach a cuff, which is what we're going to do today, because that's what the instructions say. But if you have bias binding, you can always just put a little bit of bias binding around it and do it that way as well. It might be slightly tricky unless you put your gathers really close to the edge, but you could just do it. I'll show you. One sec. Here's some stripy bias I happen to have for sale, and you can see, so it's double fold bias binding, and if you just fold it in here this way, you could also just fold this over onto here and then stitch it down, as long as your gathers are close enough to the edge. But today we're going to do it like a cuff. I've cut my cuff on the bias because I think that's fun, and it also, so you fold it in half and you press, and then you fold it in 1 centimeter and then you press as well. So now we're going to open it back up and join the sides together, like so, and then we're going to put it on the sleeve. Hello Pilar, and hello Jen. Nice that you could join, despite your appointments, Jen. And Angelique is just telling me that she's the same height and she wished to reach 1.70 m. Yeah, me too, right? And then she's stuck on 158, I'm stuck on 164. So Okay, so I've joined my cuff together, and then I'm just going to press this open. Right. Okay, so the reason for the pre-pressing is going to come clear pretty soon. Sorry, multitasking. Right, so here's my blouse. And I'm just going to, it's a little bit messy because my fabric is fraying everywhere, which is a little bit annoying. But I'm just going to find my long gathering threads. And then I'm just going to trim my frays slightly so I can actually see what I'm doing. Okay. Okay. Now we are going to slide the cuff into the sleeve. So I'm going to turn this inside out. So I'm quite sure I need to do it this way. And I'm going to check before I sew it in that I've actually put it in right. So this is on the inside. I'm going to match the seam with the underarm seam of my sleeve, if I can ever find it. Okay, yep. And then I'm going to pin along my stitch line, just so I can check that I am actually sewing in the correct place. Okay, so because what happens here, oops, I'll show you, is you stitch along this stitch line and then you fold it up and then you fold it back on itself and cover it in this way. So the way that you actually slide in the cuff and stitch together is really important. Otherwise you'll end up with a cuff that doesn't really, that all your pre-pressing work has been kind of for nothing, or you'll end up with wrong sides together or something like that. So just make sure you check that before you actually hit the presser foot. So I know that Bernice is so B3. She says that she is stuck at 156 centimeters and she wishes she was taller because her husband is 193. So I think it must be like, yeah, I think Dutch people are the tallest people in the world, and I know, Bernice, your husband is Dutch, and mine is also Dutch, and he is 195. I really like that he's tall, but he always complains that the world is not made for him, because, yeah, obviously, he just hits his head on everything, and yeah, I think that if he ever goes bald one day, then we'll just end up seeing like all these weird craters on his head because of where he's been hitting his head all his life. Hello again, Nadia. I'm just doing my sleeve now, or the sleeve cuff rather. Okay. So I've over gathered a bit because I can see that because I can see that this one is already taut, so no, I've under gathered rather. This is not gathered enough. So I'm just going to have to go back and gather a little bit more. But I haven't chopped off my threads or anything, so that's easy enough to do. I don't remember whether there was a notch at the halfway point. I think there is. But again, you know, as long as your gathers look reasonably even, then that's all you need to do. And now I'm going to stitch it from the outside, so I can see the actual gathers. And hello, Nadia's son. How old is your son, Nadia? If you don't mind sharing with us. Okay, so I'm all pinned, and I'm just going to stitch this down with the 1 centimeter allowance. I'm just looking for the, really the stripes are making my eyes go like completely weird. Okay, so start here. Just got a pin stuck. When you pin, you can pin along the stitch line, or you can pin sideways. I'm sorry, you can't see. So like this way is instead of this way. Any way is fine as long as it works for you. It's probably easier to pin it from the side, to be honest. Okay. Like I said, it's looking a little bit messy because my fabric's fraying everywhere, but it should be okay. So my gathers are on, and now I can see if I pull out my the piece I've just sewn like so, then I'm just going to turn over and stitch this down so that you have a clean edge, and that's it. So yeah, how do you rewind this video? So the video itself right now can't be rewinded, but can't be rewound rather, but yeah, it will be on the Fibre Mood website, and yeah, on stories as well. Okay, so to make sure that this actually fits, I'm also just, you can do two things. You can either trim off the gathers if you pull out the gathering threads if you really want to, but I don't think that's necessary. But what is going to be helpful is for me to trim down this a little bit so that my cuff can go over it. And what I mean is that, you know, if I trim it down, then it's just easier to see where it's meant to go instead of trying to catch it over. Sometimes if you fold it over and your seam allowance is too big, then it's going to become a bit lumpy. Just going to trim this down quickly. I really like the Norma blouse. I think this actually might be my my favorite pattern in the in this issue. I made the ivory dress before. That was quite a lot of work, but it was a nice result. I did it in a pink linen. But obviously, you can say that every issue is better than the last issue when it comes to magazines and fashion and patterns. Right, so I've trimmed down the, I've trimmed off the gathers a little bit, so now it's much cleaner. And because I've pre-pressed it, it's going to be much easier now to fold over and stitch my cuff into place. So I'm literally just folding over, and I've got my pressed lines there already, so that's really handy. And then I'm going to top stitch it into place. Now I'm also going to stitch it in place using my edge stitch foot, again because I just want to make sure that my top stitching from the edge is in where I want it to be. Now you could also use an edge stitch, you could also use a regular foot, or you can stitch it in the ditch. It doesn't really matter. I think it looks nice to, yeah, so you just want to catch the edge here. Okay, so I'm going to do that now. Put my foot on. And again, I'm going to start at my side seam, or the bottom of the wrist, just so that any ugly threads are hidden at the bottom, the starts and the finish of the thread. Making sure, taking my time to make sure that I've lined everything up properly. And then that's it. Okay, so here's the sleeve and here's the cuff, and you can see here that the where I've top stitched here, it's pretty close to the edge, but it's quite even because I've used my edge stitch foot. Okay, so then it is on to, I'm not going to do the other side because I've shown you how to do that and I don't have that much time left. So I'm just going to show you the buttonholes and the buttons. So there's a few things that are really useful when you've got buttonholes. So I'm just going to put my blouse on the stand and I'll turn it around so you can see it. So typically on women's blouses, your buttons would go on the left-hand side and your buttonholes go on the right. I'm just going to get myself a ready-to-wear dress so I can double-check this. Actually, this is my dress I made myself, but I know it's correct. Yeah, right, so the buttonholes go on the right side and the buttons on the left. You can decide however many buttons you want to have, of course. But this is a really useful, handy gadget that you can then stretch out as little or as much as you want to get it on there. So I think there's going to be 5 buttons on this blouse, so this looks about right. I've marked here, I don't think you can see on the screen, but it's there, where this should go. So I think I'm going to stop about here. That looks about right. But again, you can decide whatever it is that you want to do. Doesn't matter. Okay. So now when you do buttonholes, I have a foot for that, and my machine does them all at once. So Sadly, my buttons didn't arrive on time. I have grey mother of pearl ones coming, but they didn't arrive yet, so never mind. Instead, I'm going to use white ones because they're the same size. This is my buttonhole foot, and what I do is I put it in the top here to show me which shows me the size. And then you just kind of pop that in. Now different machines might do this differently, but here's my buttonhole in here. And then I always do a test run. And the reason for that is that because even if you've marked it properly on your piece, you don't know, you need to be able to check where your buttonhole is starting and finishing. So I'll show you what I mean. Going to get a bit of scrap. Okay, so I have a scrap piece of linen here. And I'm just going to mark a cross on it so that, and I'm going to place the middle of the cross there just to see where it ends up. So I'm going to put my cross down. Okay, so my machine does the buttonhole all in one, but you can see the cross here. This is where I marked it. Sorry, this is hanging down. One sec. Okay, so I put the cross in the middle here, and you can see where it's actually started to sew and where it goes from there. So this will affect the way that I mark it. The holes are going to go horizontally like this. So I just need to know what kind of cross I want to mark on my actual fabric. But again, you know, where your machine starts and ends a buttonhole might be different where you mark it. So that's why it's just important just to do a quick test and check where it is before you actually sew it on for real, because buttonholes are pretty annoying to unpick. Okay, so I roughly know where I want it to be. And you can see here, so I've put a pin in here where I want it. So I'm just going to mark it with chalk instead of a texter. My chalk is broken. Okay, let's use this, doesn't matter. I think it's going to be about here. And you can see that I want it to go about there. Okay, so I'm going to put my buttonhole foot back down. Where did I put it? It's over here. And voila, that is it, a buttonhole. So I'm pretty happy with the way that turned out. So I'm going to go through and finish these later, and then I'm going to sew them on. So I've got my one tip for you here is that when you sew on your actual buttons, sew them on one at a time. And then, so I'm going to do one now, and then you can put it through your buttonhole and then keep buttoning it up as you sew the buttons on. So don't be tempted to say, so you can make all the buttonholes, but then don't sew all the buttons in a row without buttoning the one before first. I hope that makes sense, because you want to make sure that your shirt actually lines up. Otherwise you have to go and do it again, which is a bit annoying. Okay, so then my tip for you when actually sewing on buttons is to use a double thread. I'm going to use a different coloured thread so I can demonstrate properly, but actually this is, can you see this? Maybe it's a bit light, hopefully it's okay. So take your thread, put it in half, and then put two ends of your thread through at the same time. Okay, so you've got two here and two here, and this bit is joined, is still one continuous thread here at the end. And the reason for that is because when you sew, just going to try and demonstrate. I'm going to demonstrate on scrap actually. When you sew, you can take your needle through the loop of this, and that makes a knot. So then you don't have a big ugly knot on the back. You'll have one when you finish because you've tied off, but at least, you know, you don't have an ugly knot there. And then you just do your button as it is there. So I'll sew that on later because I've only got a few minutes left. And the last thing I wanted to show you also, because on the hem, is that when you've turned, your hem is like this to start with, right? Because your facing's like this, and then you turn it out. Now, because I pre-pressed my hem before, as I showed you on the first video, you just need to mess around with it a little bit. Yeah, so that it sits flat like this. And then you can go, and when you go to sew your hem, you would actually just go through here, and then at least you have a clean finish on this side. So yeah, I hope that's helpful. I'm conscious I've got 4 minutes left, and last time it cut me up before I got to say goodbye to you. So yeah, I hope that's helpful for the loop and the knot. I'm gonna go do my buttonholes a bit later. Can I do it again, please? Yes, I'll show you on a different color. I'll grab another needle. Let's see if I can do this in 3 minutes. I'm seriously always losing needles. It's really annoying. Right. So what I do is I take one piece of string and I fold it in half. No worries, Bernice. See you later. I fold it in half, and then I sew two, and then I send it through the eye. So I've got, this is the open end and this is the closed end, okay? And then when I sew, I take a tiny bit to start with. Oops, that's not really a tiny bit. So my thread's like this, and then I put my needle through the loop and I pull, and thereby I avoid the ugly knot at the back. So yeah, that's it. Thank you for joining me. Next week we're going to be making the mirror dress, and I will of course post my finished Norma blouse. I hope you, I'm really glad that you enjoy coming to this, because I really enjoy talking to you and sewing with you as well, even though I find it quite hard to sew a full garment in 2 hours, but at least, we get to chat and we get to sew together, and you can do, I can show you through the main steps of making the garments. So good luck with your Normas, and I really look forward to seeing them. Please post them on Instagram, tag me. My Insta handle is called @time2sew, all one word. And I hope I'll see you next week. The patterns are free on the Fibre Mood site each week for the relevant sew alongs. So make sure you go down and download those. And I can't wait to see your creations. Thanks again, and I will see you next week. Okay, cheers, bye. Yeah, see you next week. And we start at 2 o'clock Amsterdam time, which is 1 p.m. London time. Okay, see you later.